Hello, how are you doing? I thought I would do a fun, laid-back book tag today, and since I've been reading more classic books recently, I thought it would be fun to do a book tag all centered around the classics. So I came across this old book tag, I think it was from 4 years or so, called For the Love of Classics, and it was created by Ange from Beyond the Pages. I'll put a link below to her original video. She came up with 15 questions all around classic books, and I thought it was really fun. So I'm going to answer these questions. I'd be really curious to know your answers too, if you want to answer some or all of them in the comments below, or if you want to make your own video response to this if you haven't done so already, that would be good as well. So the very first question in this is, why do you read classics, and how often do you read classics? So I'd have to say probably I read them because it's a guaranteed good time, or almost guaranteed good time. It's more likely to be quality literature, and with contemporary novels, it's a sort of a potluck of whether it'll be good or not. And if a book is deemed a classic, it is probably more likely to be really good, since it's stood the test of time, or whatever you want to say to it. I mean, not always. I mean, sometimes we don't like the classics. There's probably lots and lots of one-star reviews of War and Peace on Goodreads and all of that. We might not personally like it, but it's generally books that are considered important in the history of literature and all of that sort of thing. How many classics do I read? Well, it's probably about, on average, around like one a month. I mean, sometimes I read a bit more, sometimes I read less. As I've been talking about a lot recently, I've got into Anthony Trollope, and that has had me reading a lot more. And there's lots and lots of Trollope to read. I have a whole stack of them here, and I'm making my way through the Barsetshire series Chronicles, and so I've read 3 so far from that. There's more to read, and he wrote even much more than that in another whole series, and a lot of independent books that are just sort of standalone books, and and I'm really enjoying his work. Question 2 is, what is a period, country, culture that you haven't read many classics from and would like to read more? I would probably answer for this Japan, for a couple of reasons. Just because several years ago I took my first trip to Japan and I loved it so much. I'd like to go back someday. Obviously can't at the moment, but yeah, that's making me miss it, and I'd like to go back there again. And I have read some both classic and contemporary Japanese literature, but I would like to read more. So I have read some books by authors like Yuko Tsushima and Kobo Abe, Jonashiro Tanizaki, and Yuko Mishima. But yeah, I'd really like to read more and go back through some of the history of Japanese literature. Question 3 is, what is a modern book that you think will become a classic in 100 years' time? I love this sort of question, and I made a whole booktube tag video. The only original booktube tag that I've ever made before is called the Future Classics tag, and I'll put a link to that below if you want to see some of the questions and answers I came up for that, because yeah, I just think it's so interesting to think about what books being published today might people still be reading in 100 years' time, if we're all still around in 100 years' time. And one recent one I would really say is Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann, which was my favorite book I read in the year that it was published. I think it's so brilliant in capturing in voluminous detail the mood of the moment, and people will, in 100 years' time, will probably read this and look back on it and see all of the preoccupations we had, and the things we were stressing about and thinking about, and a lot of the issues that we were dealing with in contemporary culture today. And she does so artfully and in a really moving way, an intelligent way, and yeah, so I'm just a massive fan of this book. Question 4 is, what is the last classic that you read? And the one that I just finished last week, I think, is Dr. Thorne by Anthony Trollope. As I said, I've been going on an Anthony Trollope binge lately, and I enjoyed this so much. There are so many really pleasurable, funny scenes in it, as well as very moving and touching touching moments between the characters. He just captures their humanity so well. There's this great scene where the young hero of the book goes to a duke's dinner, and he's so excited to meet the duke and become friends with the duke, but finds that the duke has nothing to do with his guests when he gets there. And it's just so funny how he's really offended that nobody is wanting to, that the duke doesn't want to talk to him, and everyone else is just sort of knows that this is normal and is just enjoying drinking the duke's wine. And but he's just sitting there like all flustered and annoyed about it. And I just found that so funny. And there's lots of other very funny scenes in this. There's a scene where there's a man giving a political speech when he's standing for parliament, and he starts getting rotten eggs thrown at him, and all of these things. And so I just enjoyed reading this so much, and reading it as part of the Trollope Society's big read, where they did this big group read, and there's been meetings every fortnight talking about certain sections of this novel, and we had our final meeting recently, and that was really enjoyable. Question 5 is, what is the first classic you ever read? That's quite difficult to answer. I don't know if I can really remember what the first book I read that would be considered a classic. I mean, the first one that really sticks out in my memory is reading The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I enjoyed this so much when I was a boy. Like many boys, it just like completely captured my imagination, and I was transported to this whole other fantastical world. And I just loved the cover. I loved staring at this beautiful cover with this illustration of this mountain landscape, and it just was part of the whole parcel of transporting me to this whole other land. Question 6 is favorite classic book cover. I can't answer this with just one book. It's too difficult to decide. There are so many beautiful editions of classic books, and I have a number of ones that are sort of favorites of mine, and one that I've sort of trotted out a number of times is these vintage editions of Virginia Woolf's books, which are so beautiful, and I keep going back to them and showing them off because they're so lovely. I mean, look at Mrs. Dalloway in this beautiful abstract design, and my favorite novel of all time, The Waves by Virginia Woolf, and To the Lighthouse, and A Room of One's Own, and then a new one which I don't think I've showed on camera before is Flush, her novel written from the perspective of a dog, I think. I haven't actually read it yet, but yeah, this completes this like group of vintage classics that they brought out with these beautiful designs of Virginia Woolf's books. So there are those. Then Virago Editions also did these beautiful editions of some of their classic reprints that they brought out for their 40th anniversary, and with these sort of repeated designs through them. So there's Muriel Spark with Memento Mori, which is very stark and gray, which sort of goes with the subject matter. And then there's Their Eyes Were Watching God, and look at how gorgeous that is. They're very shiny too, and it's just really beautiful. There's Grace Paley's collected short stories. And then look at this. This is my favorite, The Magic Toy Shop by Angela Carter. Look at how gleaming and beautiful that is. And just so gorgeous. So I love these. They're just so beautiful, of course, with their green spines for the Virago editions. And then also, I just love the Persephone classic books. I mean, they published all their books titles in this dove gray solid color. So you get a lot of them like this, and they just all sit beautifully uniformly on your shelves, though they all have some of the like original designs inside as well. And but also some of their titles they also publish with these paintings on the cover. And so there's this one called The Homemaker by Dorothy Canfield Fisher, which I went to buy from the shop I think last year or so. And look at it, it's a boy reading late at night with a lamp turned so he can see the pages, and he has a dog on his lap, and it's just it's so lovely. And yeah, so I think those are just gorgeous as well. But yeah, it's really difficult to pick just one. Question 7 is classic authors you wish had written more books. And I think this is a really interesting one. The one I would pick is Djuna Barnes, who wrote this. She's more like a cult classic author than I think, one like big established classic author, although she's an established classic author in my mind. She was writing in the early half of the 20th century, and her most famous novel is Nightwood, and I think this is a brilliant novel. But she also published this collection of short stories called Smoke, and she wrote this very funny book called Lady's Almanac, which is sort of satirizing the lesbian social scene in early 20th century Paris. And yeah, it's such an interesting time capsule of that time, and some of the vibrant personalities that were in this sort of like girls club at the time in Paris. And she also wrote this book of poems called the Book of Repulsive Women and Other Poems. And yeah, I just thought she's so fascinating. And she didn't write a huge amount, but I think her personality just sort of lives on through her words. And it would have been really fascinating if she had like a really long career and written a large amount of books, to see if the diversity of her subject matter that she could bring into her work. Question 8 is least favorite classic, and probably my least favorite is Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. I read this when I went on holiday to an island, and so I have really fond memories of like reading it in this very beautiful atmospheric conditions, but I didn't enjoy the actual experience of reading it all that much, because it's very repetitive, and like literally there are some sections of it. I mean, I was sort of called out recently by someone in the comments section that said, some classics were serialized and all of that, and which is true, but this wasn't serialized as far as I know. There's like a whole section where he talks about going to the island, and then he catalogs in exhausting detail all of his experience of being on the island, and sort of repeating all of the same details that he'd already wrote, and I found that really dull. And obviously there's a whole lot of problematic things about it, with this terror of the cannibals coming to the island, and so yeah, lots of yucky sort of racist connotations attached to it as well. But overall, yeah, I just thought it was quite a dull and not very successful book, although obviously it was massively famous at the time for being transportive, of taking people to this exotic place. But yeah, it doesn't, I don't think, work reading it today. Question 9 is favorite translated classic. It's difficult to like choose for this, but I probably have to say Madame Bovary for this, just because I've read this book multiple times and I think it's so brilliant, and I've got so much more out of it every time I've read it. I mean, this edition, I have this really beat up old copy of it, which really has the old book smell to it. I think I must have got it at a charity shop at one point. So this edition is translated by Alan Russell. I think some people have said recently that there are better translations of this novel. So if you know of a better translation of it, let me know in the comments below, and I'll look that up, and I'll when I reread this, I'll read that different translation of it. So that would be really helpful. Question 10 is favorite modern classic, that is a book published after the year 1900. And like I already said, my favorite book of all time, not just out of classics, is Virginia Woolf's The Waves, which was first published in 1931. I think it is so brilliant and multi-layered. I know I should do a whole video devoted just to this book, because I could talk on and on about it, probably for an hour or multiple hours. There's so much to say about it. It has a very unique structure and a very unique tone to it. It has this sort of poetic, subterranean consciousness sort of language, all about 6 characters. I mean, 7 characters really, but you only get the voices of 6 characters. And I know a lot of people, when they first start reading this, find it quite repetitious. That there's not a lot of diversity in the voices that you get of the different characters. But I think once you really get to know the characters and their whole personalities, it does come across really differently, because it is all in a sort of similar poetic language, but they have very distinct consciousness and perspectives and points of view and ways of interpreting the world around them, and you follow them throughout their entire lives, from their childhood to late in their lives, and it's just so moving and incredible what she says in this, and I've read this countless times. I get something new out of it all the time. I find it incredibly moving, and I wanted to make a whole video series about this with another booktuber named Brixton. I don't know if any of you remember him. He made a few videos and then he just sort of disappeared, and he's still on social media like Twitter and Instagram, and but he's so intelligent and sensitive, and for a while we were corresponding and talking with each other about making a collaboration series all about this novel, because he was living in Japan for quite a long time. I think he's moved back to Canada now, but he was living in Japan for quite a long time, and we had this ambitious idea of making a whole series of videos all about the waves, because we both love it so much. But yeah, that just never really came about, even though we talked about it quite a lot. But yeah, I would like to someday do a whole series just about this novel. Question 11 is classic literary places you would like to visit, and I have a sort of I've gone to some places like Bronte Country, and I've gone to Monk's House, Virginia and Leonard Woolf's house out in the country before, and I've visited places like that, and I've gone to the setting of Rebecca, where the house probably where she was inspired to write that novel. But one place I would like to go to is Beckford's Tower, that was named after William Beckford, and that is just outside of Bath somewhere, and I've never gone to it, but I find William Beckford a fascinating figure from literary history. He was this sort of pretty boy playboy of the late 1700s and early 1800s. He was hugely wealthy, and he was the son of the Lord Mayor of London, and had this incredible wealth which he spent freely buying lots of art and creating these huge structures. He built this folly which I think sort of crumbled down and collapsed because it was like so ambitious, the scale of it that he wanted to make, but he was also a writer of Gothic novels. He was one of the first Gothic novelists and wrote a novel called Vathek, which I've never read before, but I've read about him just because I think he's so fascinating. He had a really strange and varied life. He was bisexual, and he also wrote a lot of music, and so this is him on the cover, and then this is also a picture of him when he was just 21 years old, and I just found him so fascinating, and so I'd like to go to this setting of Beckford Tower. Question 12 is first classic you would recommend for a child, and even though I only just read it for the first time myself recently, me, a man in my 40s, is Little Women. I think there's no better book you can read as a child. I wish I had read it as a child. I think it would have inspired and given me so much joy if I'd read it when I was younger. But I loved it so much reading it now that I would like to give that experience to other children and recommend that other children read this when they're young. Question 13 is classics you think are mistitled, and what title would you give them? This is a really interesting question, but I don't have a very good answer for it, I don't think. I mean, when I think of classics like Jane Eyre or Rebecca or Little Dorrit or Crime and Punishment or Great Expectations or Bleak House, these titles seem to really encapsulate either the central character or the main subject matter of those novels that I can't really even conceive of them with any other titles. So I'd like to hear other people's answer for this, but me myself, I can't think of a really good answer. I mean, it's an interesting thing about Dr. Thorne is there's a whole self-conscious conversation that the author has in within this novel about the title of it and whether it should be called Dr. Thorne, because even though Dr. Thorne is a very strong presence in this and has sort of the most agency as a character in this the plot of this novel, he's often in the background and not really central to the actual story that's being told. And there's even like a number of chapters where he doesn't appear, and Trollope sort of playfully brings him back into the story, saying, "Oh, we haven't seen Dr. Thorne for quite a while, but here I'm going to reintroduce him to the story." And so yeah, I think there's some funny things like that. But I probably would keep this novel called Dr. Thorne, even though, you know, he's not the most central presence in the story. But yeah, so I think it's an interesting question, but yeah, I just can't come up with a good answer. Question 14 is your favorite classic that you would recommend to everyone. And this is slightly tricky too, because a classic I would recommend to everyone, I don't know, because, you know, my favorite classic is The Waves, as I've been talking about, but I don't know if I would actually recommend it to everyone, because it is quite difficult to get into, even though I think it's absolutely brilliant. And that's not sort of like putting down other readers' intelligence or what I think they're capable of reading, but just more, I think it is quite opaque at first when you try to get into it, and so it does take real dedication, and you have to have real faith that this is a novel you'll probably really enjoy. And I also know it's a particular style that just probably not everyone would really enjoy. So actually I would recommend everyone read Orlando by Virginia Woolf over The Waves, because I think it's a more accessible novel, even though it's also like very weird, and she has all sorts of asides in it and sort of tangents that she goes off on, and you know, the actual story itself of an individual that changes sex over long periods of time and throughout history is pretty wild, but it is, I think, more accessible in a way, and really enjoyable and fun in a way that's more immediate than in her novel The Waves. So yeah, this is the big one that I would recommend to absolutely everyone. And finally, question 15 is, who do you tag? Well, nobody actually tagged me in this video. I just happened to come across it and thought it sounded really fun. So I'm not going to tag anyone in particular, but like I said, if you enjoyed these questions and would like to answer them yourselves, please do so in the comments below, or make your own video. And if you do make your own video, put that in the comments below so I can find it, because I'd really like to see other people's responses to these questions. But thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye.